So, hello everyone, this is Channel QA Stack, and today we are going to check how to integrate Zephyr along with the automation regression suite. So, usually, this is the scenario where we have automation regression suite in which we have automation scripts and the execution results, and then we have test management tool where we have test cases and we update the test execution status there, upload the results there. And usually this test case status update and results upload activity is manual, which takes a lot of effort. So now we are going to see how we can integrate the status update along with the regression suite. So we are going to target an automation regression suite where we'll be executing the scripts, generating the results, and then execution status update, and then results upload. Everything will be done by automation without any manual intervention. So without further ado, let's move on to the coding part. Let me create a new class for it. So let me show you the Jira. This is my Jira software and I have downloaded a trial version of it for the demo part. If you're using it in companies, you must be having the Jira URL starting with the company domain name and then the Jira details. So you have to use that URL over here. So these are the demo test cases which I have created. So these are the three tests. And these tests will be tested under test cycle. So we have to add one test cycle and then pull these tests under those test cycle and execute them. Let me show you an example. So these are the test cycle. Under these test cycles, these tests are executed. Under this cycle, we have one test. Under this cycle, we don't have any. So we have, for executing it, first thing is we need to create a test cycle and then add the test cases to it and then execute it. Now let's move on to the code. So to automating the status update for the test cases, the first thing which we have to do is we will be needing a few details. First thing is the Jira URL on which you will be working. I'm sorry. So in my case, this will be this local host. Next thing which I need will be the project ID. So the project name, my project name is QA Stack Demo. To get the project ID, I have to do a view page source. And search for project ID. Here is my project ID. Next thing what I want is version ID. So the default version ID is -1. So here you see we are having one version unscheduled. If you are adding a cycle and unscheduled version, the version ID will be -1 only. Next thing, we need an issue key for which we will going to update the status. Let's say we are taking QA test 2. Next is we will need cycle ID. So for cycle ID, so let's execute our test cases under ad hoc. So here we don't have any test case executions right now. So let's execute the test cases under here. So to fetch the cycle ID, you have to follow the simple step. There is a URL which you can hit with a get request and you can get the cycle ID details. So here you need to provide the project ID and in authorization you have to provide your username and password. Select the authorization type as basic. In headers you have to provide content type as application JSON and then you have to hit send. So now we have received the response. It will be having detail for all the cycles. We need to get the details for ad hoc cycle. So the cycle ID for this is -1. Similarly, for other cycles, like let's say this is demo test cycle, so cycle ID for this will be 3. And you can also see the version IDs from here. They are also returned. So version ID for this ad hoc is -1 and you can also get version ID from here. So now for ad hoc the cycle ID is -1, so let's just put -1 over here. And that's it. Now we are going to start coding. So basically for updating the status we are using the Zephyr APIs, also known as Zappy. So Zephyr provides an extensive list of APIs to directly interact with their microservices and update and create test cases. So for that we will be using rest assured over here. So let me create a request specification object. let me import this. Yes. So the first step would be we have to fetch one issue ID based on issue key. So right now we are using QAS2. We have to fetch issue ID for QAS, issue key QAS2. So we have, let's rename this as issue key request, issue ID request. Now we need to add header. Content type, application JSON. Then we need to add the authorization details. Authorization, you have to add another header, and its value will be, to fetch the authorization value, first you need to encode your credentials, that is your login credentials. So for example, my user name is this and my password is this. So you need to encode this complete string in base 64. You can use any online encoding methods to do that. And then you have to put the authorization details over here as basic, and then the token encrypted value which you have received. In case you are having Postman, you can go under the authorization tab and can select the authorization type as basic and provide your username and password. And if you go to the coding tab, you will be able to see the encrypted string. Sorry, it's not copied. So we have added headers. Then next thing is we have to get an endpoint. The endpoint is REST. So you have to mention your issue key over here. Now we are going to hit the request. The result we'll be obtaining in the form of response. So let's get the response body. As a string, and then we are going to fetch the execution ID, sorry, issue ID. So for that, get ID. Let's save this value and issue ID. Okay, let's convert all the variables to static. So we're going to use all of them. Let's remove all the errors. Now let's print this issue ID. Now let's execute this code. The issue ID which we have received is 110. Now let's move on to the next step. Let me fetch issue ID from issue key. This will be the step 1. Step 2 will be create execution ID. So to create execution ID, again we'll have to create one request. So let me copy this from here, and this time I'm giving it name execution ID, exact ID request. The first two headers, content type and authorizations, will remain the same. Now let's create the endpoint. So the endpoint would be REST API latest execution. Then we need to provide the this is the endpoint. For execution ID, we'll be doing a post request, so we need to create a body. Map request body. Let's import this class. Now you need to put issue ID over here, which we just fetched in the above step. Next is you have to put cycle ID, which is cycle ID only. Then we need to put, so this is the cycle ID which we are passing over here. Then we have to provide the version ID, version ID will be this version ID we need to provide. Then we need to provide a project ID. So this is the project ID which we are going to provide here. Okay. So now let me add this body to my request. And let's do the post request. First, let's check the status code, and then I will show you how to fetch the execution ID from the response. Let's execute this piece of code. This is the issue ID. Okay, my bad, I have not printed the status code anywhere. Let me print this status code. (404). So let's recheck all our parameters. Issue ID, cycle ID, version ID, and project ID. Okay, so the URL was incorrect, that's why. Now we have received the code as 200. Now let me show you how to fetch the execution ID. To fetch the execution ID is a little tricky because it is returned in keys, not in values. So first of all, we'll be converting the response into string. Then we are going to split it based upon colon and pick the first element, which will be containing the execution ID. Then we need to replace the extra characters, that is quotes, with nothing. Also, we need to replace the opening bracket with null. Let's print this execution ID. So the execution ID is 7. Now the next step which we have to do is update the status. So to update the status, we need to hit one put request. Again, we are going to create a request specification. Content type and authorization, both the headers we will be using. Now we have to create an endpoint. So endpoint for update would be REST Zephyr latest execution plus the execution ID, which we have fetched in above step. And slash execute. So this is our string. Again, we will be needing one body over here. So let's copy the hash mark. This will be update request body. And we are going to add just one value, that is status. So if we want the status to be passed, the value should be 1. For failed, the status is 2. So let's start with passed. Adding this body to our request. Now let's hit put with this request. Provide the endpoint. Let's print the status of the response. So now let's try this. The response is 200. Let's refresh our Jira. So in ad hoc, you can see actually we have executed this test multiple times, so multiple execution IDs were created. Let me create one new cycle. The cycle name would be demo cycle 2. Let's fetch the cycle ID and update the test under demo cycle 2. Let's hit the cycle details URL. Here, search for demo cycle 2. This is the newly created cycle. Let's scroll up and see the ID. It's 5. Let's put the cycle ID 5. Now here we are executing it once So we should have exactly one test case updated along with its status. Let's hit the run button. Now it's executed. Status code is 200. Let's refresh the Jira board. So this is demo test cycle. You can see the count is 1 and the status is passed. This is QAS2. This has been added into the cycle and marked as passed. So that was it for this video. Please let me know in comment section if you need any other details regarding this. Thank you.